Well, hello and welcome to the Collective Reset podcast, where we gather to discuss our lives, our passions, our self-care, and just how we're handling this worldwide reset that we're in right now. So if you could introduce yourself to the audience, and where are you in the world right now?
Hi, thanks so much for having me on here today. My name is Muthoni Wambu Kraal, and I am the National Political and Organizing Director for the Democratic National Committee here in Washington, D.C., where I am still sheltering in place with my family, not too far from our office, which has been closed since March.
And can you explain to everyone just how we know each other, when we met?
I'd be delighted to, Iana, because this is a full circle moment, truly, to see you in your element. We have known each other, our families, our mothers in particular, had a strong relationship and friendship that carried over to their daughters. You and my sister are were good friends growing up, and you were always like a little sister to me, but certainly little no more. And I am so excited to see you in your element, truly. And I think there is no accident here that somehow what you are doing and what I do are still connecting. And I think so much of this is about the women and everyone else in our ecosystem who raised us to be aware, active, and engaged in our
Absolutely.
community and in our politics.
Absolutely. I've loved watching your career. I'm so impressed by you as someone I love and just as a woman and a Black woman in this world. And part of why I wanted to gather people on this platform was just to introduce these amazing people that I know to the world, and for us to have discussions about what's going on and how we're handling it, and to give some motivation to people who are trying to figure out now what to do and in which direction to go. So talking about our families, I'd love to talk about your dad for a moment. So can you give us just like a background on where your dad's from, where that side of your family is from?
Yeah, so I have a mother from the Midwest and a father from Kenya. Someone stole my story. He shall remain nameless. But my father, Professor Christopher Wambu, is from Kenya originally and is himself sheltering in place in New York, which is where we all grew up. I think that's important to mention. I think that has a lot to do with the kind of folks that we are today and why we are oftentimes the bridges between and reflections of that upbringing, which is one that involves so many folks from so many different walks of life. And my dad continues to be a very energetic and passionate teacher and educator, even still today. So he's one of those ones who just finished doing a lot of distance teaching, and part of our, of our age, inside of this sort of intergenerational moment that we're all experiencing differently. So many of us have seen parents and grandparents that have now officially become a part of like this Zoom generation, and that's been incredible to see.
That's so interesting because I was just watching a documentary and the name is escaping me right now, but it was discussing higher education and it moving into the virtual space and what that means for higher education as a whole and for people going into those 4-year spaces and what kind of decision young people are having to make right now. Speaking of your father and Kenya, a lot of what we also talk about on this platform is what we are looking forward to post pandemic, post social distancing. And so many people are talking about traveling to Africa. And you've always been able to travel and you have seen what is not on TripAdvisor and on the, what people are just Googling. So I'm wondering, like, what are your highlights, your family's highlights of Kenya? If people are sitting home right now searching for what they're going to do when they're let out, What advice would you have?
Well, so I have this book that my dad gave me, and I obsessed over it for a long time because, travel was prohibitively expensive for so many folks, especially in my generation. It has slowly become more accessible for more people. But getting on a plane and flying to Kenya was a big investment. That's why my dad was
Sure.
usually, he was the only one who went for so long, who could go home. And so many of us who have parents from elsewhere, that was often our stories if they were further away and where the flights were, thousands of dollars. So truly, my first trip came in 2011,
Mm,
and it was a magical experience for me. The family part of it being the biggest piece, and the piece that I think is so incredibly important, and I know that this is happening even as people have looked at Ghana and they have like been, what pining over a lot of folks' Instagrams and whatnot. But there is an entire continent that offers so much geodiversity, and some of my favorite things to read are about folks who really are exploring so many places and the richness of it all. My favorite place, it turned out I discovered on my last visit, most recently with my son. And he actually wasn't with me, but we took this trip together, the two of us. And he went with my dad to Masai Mara to go on safari, which, is an incredible moment to be able to do with your son, or for, my dad and a grandson to be able to go on together. I don't think he would have cared if it was a granddaughter. It really, gender is not the issue here, but for them to have experienced that and for him to be able to sort of give him that moment was incredible. They also glamped. I'm not even going to lie to you.
oh,
Like, I
I'm
couldn't
so
believe.
jealous.
Oh no, he just spoiled the heck out of him. They had an amazing tent. They were right there by the river. And so when they woke up, you could see the animals, and the rivers obviously are not just sources of water, but hey, everybody may catch a meal every now and
Mm-hmm.
then.
Mm-hmm.
And so now Maria, who my son's name, he is so, I mean, zoos just become a different thing for you once you have
Once you've
gone.
seen Safari, you're like, what is this?
Right.
These sad animals.
You do. You definitely look at things differently. But for me, for Mama and her little getaway that I got while they were doing their thing, their walkabout, as I called it. But I was, on the other hand, really getting a moment to go to a place called Lamu. And Lamu is on it's on the east coast of Kenya. It is on the water. It's an archipelagical, and it's large, larger than people would realize. And it's where a lot of traders came through, whether they were Arab or whether the Portuguese came through, and the Swahili people were there. So it's a very intermixed area, and it's Christian and it's Muslim. And going there is so much old architecture.
Mm,
There is so much around their art and their architecture that really has preserved, because they, for so long, kept a lot of the modern uh, sort of transportation and other things out. You move around by dhow, these boats,
mm.
and a lot of folks they'll use the donkeys. Now they have the motorbikes going, which is very loud and very counter to everything else that you see when you're there. But it is so beautiful, and I have to tell you, being around, and I mean, it is heavily Muslim in that part, and the brother Muhammad, who was giving us the tour, really wanted to make the point of sharing that they live side by side with their Christian, neighbors and brothers and sisters, and that this area, in and of itself, is one where people are just neighbor to neighbor,
Hmm.
and the jewelry and the natural beauty. And I went to a women's collective that they were making their jewelry together, and they sell it together to, stack their coin together. And
I
it was
like it.
really amazing to see. It is a place that I highly recommend people put on their list.
Wonderful. I hope that everyone wrote that down. I am certainly going to add it to my list. We are hoping to as soon as we're able to. The plan was always to, after the bus, head overseas and spend some extended time in Africa, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'm going to add that.
Okay.
When you talk about the neighbor to neighbor and the stacking coins together and the working as a collective, what does your family, these people who are living like this, what do they think of what's happening here? When you speak with them, what's their perspective on how we are not living collectively, stacking coins together? Um, what are their opinions?
So my family, we're doing our usual. We do like a weekly. I started the weekly Zoom family Zoom call with us, and it's funny because it does. We do time zone wise have to have the Kenya time zone match up with the New York to match up with my sister and I here in DC. And then we have the nerve at times to add other people, including like my cousin Jonathan, who's out in California. And so we did that whole thing. It was fun.
That's too many time zones.
But hey, I'm in politics. I'm used to doing this, especially working for a national organization, and it's so worth it. Really being able to pull in family right now is something that so many of us are doing, and for those of us who, I mean, it's so painful not being able to have the choice to see your relatives right now. My father and my and my stepmother right now are separated, and
Mm,
these are two beautiful partners who now cannot be in the same place. And she's luckily kind of helping to take care of things and people at home, and he is doing the same here because we are a family that sort of spans right now. And so, and they're both very strong leaders inside of our family structure. And look, they know the work that I do, and they themselves have always been very engaged. And um, a lot of our conversations revolve around the politics here. Our conversations revolve around the politics in Kenya and how things are going there. This past weekend, I mean, she's I call her Maito, so that we don't have to use words like stepmother that don't quite
beautiful.
tell the story. But she shared that that things are starting to pick up in terms of surging around COVID, and she lost a very dear friend this week, which made it really real for her and someone who's younger.
Mm,
And so, I think for our older parents and again grandparents, etc., there is obviously that fear given their age group. I just think it further devastates them to see younger people who get sick and don't make it through.
mhm.
And and then for the big picture around looking at this country, I think that there is always sort of there. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and I think a lot of it depends on how much you know. So she went to college here. A lot of Kenyans do come and may go to school here, etc. And many will stay, many will also go back. And so you have that mixture now, and obviously with the internet, I mean, I think people are becoming so aware, and nothing has made people more aware though of the racial dynamics and truth of this country than everything that has now truly been reflected, and not always still in the way that the story should be told, to be clear about movement and protests and what it is that we have sort of what it sort of culmination, moment that we are in right now. Which is why I have really wanted to go on and I want to talk about and tell our story in as many places as I can, particularly on the international front, where people are saying, help me understand what's happening, right? And there isn't always a natural understanding because there's so much of our truth that is missing. They know what Hollywood brings them. They know the bits and pieces that they may experience if they've been here for a 4 year university and maybe a little bit after. But oftentimes those colleges will be in a small town or they'll be live out in the suburb. And so truly experiencing Black life in America is, I mean, unless you are my husband, who is Dutch, as you know, and he's from the Netherlands, who sits and lives under the roof.
Mhm.
And even then, the explanations, I mean, for
Mm,
anyone interracial relationship, you know that there is a lot of unpacking that you have to do, and it's an argument because there's nothing. It's because the behavior is illogical and it's so monstrous that it is so difficult for people to have to sit and really understand that day in and day out there's an intentional pattern and institutionalized way of doing and being. It's so incongruent with what they've been sold by Hollywood, or as my husband calls it, the Ministry of Propaganda. So that is literally what he has said. And so your rules and advice and all of that, they just don't apply, because you have to better understand what it is that you are looking at before you can really, have the right kinds of like analysis. And so many people don't know what they are seeing. So a lot of what we have been able to do, and we talk about it as a family, is to share. Being Black and African doesn't necessarily mean that there is that automatic connectivity, as we know, to the Black American experience. And my dad is sort of a unique figure in that he is African, but he also teaches African American studies. And he has spent his life reading and studying and engaging and, activating, right side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Because, again, there are so many that if you move here or you're sitting in your living rooms or around a bar or in your churches elsewhere, and you are talking about or thinking about America, the story of Black America is has been so distorted, and not to even begin to mention like the lack of real story around Latinos or Native American or so many other of our people and our citizens in this country, or those who have are here and are striving to become citizens of this country. There is so much about the stories that are not told properly, and where so many of these are they aren't even talked about per se. I don't know that people necessarily understand or could break apart, the Asian American experience here in America in its tremendous varying ways. But what I do know is that this is a time where the emperor has no clothes, and where truly I think that once you begin to question this fundamental piece around human rights and the fact that we are now having seen as truly having committed atrocities, against when it comes to human rights, um, that there is no going back from that. And there is a pressure that's continuing inside that won't allow sort of that backsliding. And, um, the story is now out there. And there is a global reaction that has happened fairly quickly, not unlike when the Arab Spring took place. And, I remember that there were people in Wisconsin who were sending, pizza orders and helping, like, I mean, there were folks who were, sorry, I'm getting the story backwards, but that after the Arab Spring, when there were protests in Wisconsin by some of the labor people, there were folks that were ordering from overseas pizza to help support them. Like, our reaction time now as global people of goodwill and intent, who are, when we see something and when we are trying to figure out, when we feel immediately jolted into a sense of maybe even connectivity, because there's nothing sort of unique about a lot of the stories of oppression and the scenarios here, other than the way that ours has been so institutionalized, and certainly that in and of itself is does make it very different. It also makes us some of the foremost experts, on liberation, and so. But there is something that is happening now where we are no longer living in silos. Silos are the most dangerous things. I've often said if you're left to fight alone, those are the hardest fights. But when you have this patchwork, when you have other people who see it as a part of their human duty to stand with you, that these are the things that's when you see America move. That's when you see like deep and sweeping, and it almost feels swift at the time. You almost forget everything else that has, had to lead up to this moment, each little pebble.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where we are right now. And I keep really emphasizing, you know, beyond the protests, everything else that's happening. Like what doors that has opened already. Don't wait for November and an election. That's not the marker. That is one very important part. And everything else that's happening right now will only help if we do this right to making sure that that too is impacted. But these mayors and these city councils and these governors and people who have power that don't have to wait for the federal government to act, because we know that Trump won't. We know that these Senate Republicans won't act on behalf of justice, and in fact stand absolutely in the way of it, unapologetically. That these other elected officials, they are making a real, I mean, there is such a contrast. And I hope that people see now and again why you still can't give up on the institution of elected government. There's too much that we can actually get done. There's the people that need to help carry out the laws, but we got to get the laws right and we got to get those reworked. And there's so much imagination and creativity that is taking place right now. And frankly, there was a lot of imagination and creativity that was taking place before. But going back to the idea of silos, we didn't know to take some of these examples. You know, I read about Eugene, Oregon, where they have been using, I think, for the last 30 years, they've had a sort of volunteer, people driven, um, organized way of engaging with, I think it's an organization, they've given it a name. And it is the way that they don't need the police to answer every call. So they are, they have instead, maybe like volunteer firefighters, but like instead they have mental health professionals, they have others who are engaged, and they are the first responders to a lot of these calls. And because they realize that so many of the killings that were happening and these moments of direct tension that just could not seem to be de escalated between police were oftentimes with folks who were struggling with mental health issues, and that and the police were not the answer, not even visually in this. And this was, a direct quote from one of the,
That's such an important point. Not even visually. If
yeah.
you are on the receiving end of that, visually, you have already
Hmm.
crossed a line and pushed someone into a space that is no longer safe.
Correct. And could lead to a heightened reaction from them. So that is, something that they have put into, and now they they have said that they work really very sort of side by side at this point. And of course, started out from a place of total suspicion, because when this group started, they were very much like anti, because it was like a reaction to something that was so broken that they didn't trust, the system that was there to be able to sort of get it right. But they have started to figure out over the years how to be partners with one another. So that's just
That's
one example.
beautiful and a wonderful example when people are wondering, well, how does this work? And well, there's no example of this. Yes, there is one, and it's doing well. And it might have started off with some hiccups, and it might take a minute to find our stride. But
Mhm.
the it's what you've said that even the visual perception leads to an escalated response, and we're trying to avoid escalated responses.
Mhm.
Um, when I listen to you talk and you share your incredible education and wisdom, I think about how this has been who you've been your whole life, and your parents met through activism. And so when I think about this generation now of all these children, right, that are growing up, going to protests, and are hearing these conversations like your son, um, what was that like as a child to be a part of these sorts of dialogues for parents who are wondering, like, am I doing the right thing for having my child be a part of this, or should I have my child be a part of this, because will they even remember, or will this have an impact? What do you think that was like for you, and did it have an impact?
Well, it had an incredible life changing impact. I absolutely believe that everything about how I grew up, and particularly in my earliest years, frankly, which I think can often be surprising to people, how much we underestimate the soaking in process and how early that begins. Because I was born in Chicago on the South Side in the '70s. Before you and I met, before we came to New York, there was the South Side of Chicago that really kind of was my initial place of influence and space of influence. And man, it did a number on me. Like, this is literally the foundation for my activism, for my kind of worldview, began in a place where a lot of communal work was being done and um, where I saw sort of the village approach to life. um, Really, that was something that my parents were very committed to, and they brought that with them to New York and recreated it there with your mom and others. But we believed in collective work and responsibility, and we truly believed and fully did celebrate Kwanzaa, of course, but yes, lived out those principles on a very regular basis. And I say to folks, when they ask me how I got into politics, I say it was parental osmosis. Like, I am pretty clear that this began in a way where I was sort of voluntold from
Mm.
early on. And there was an expectation because what was also being made clear was the privilege all around me for the life that I was already getting to lead, for the meals on our table, for the things that we had the abilities to do, the access that we had, and what we were supposed to be doing with those things. So nothing was sort of ever yours, which is very African.
I like that.
You know? And we know that it's also very indigenous. There is like this idea, right, where you are sort of, even with my name, and going back to Muthoni and how naming works in my father's tribe, you're sort of, you're like borrowing the name. You are an inhabitant of this name, and there is a lot that's expected of you in carrying the name. But there is a naming order. You're born into that, and you are supposed to kind of you step into that, and that is like that. There's the name, but um, there isn't this sense of like a focus on total focus on ownership in the way that I think we see here in the way that American society has developed, and uh, there is instead a lot more of that communal approach is really um, inherent in so much of what we do and did, which again is why it makes it your business. It makes it your responsibility. Caring and checking in on and like doing your part to kind of show up and, do what it is that you do and give that is expected. It was expected constantly. I My son isn't being raised in exactly the same way. Um, he has a mixture right now between myself and my husband, and um, there is a very like the very Dutch way of doing things is a little bit opposite even, which is like
What
you
is
sort of
their approach? I'm
yeah
interested because we're
yeah
talking about going to Curacao to settle. That's
okay
our like 5 year,
yeah.
and that's Dutch inhabited.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I would love to know like
The thing that
what's
I
the
find
approach?
so interesting is that I say all of this about kind of like, you got to sweep your own yard and you do your thing and you like, there is a showing up that you do and you have a very inherent responsibility. Um, but there's this just this very contained sort of way of doing things, I think. And, and, and it's a little bit more, um, I do think it's a little bit more siloed, and we're just, I think, a lot more, about that village approach. Um, but in their laws, getting back to like what I mean about legal structures and why
Mm.
these things matter, no matter how you choose to individually live your life, I truly do believe that that is up to you, and there are lots of cultural ways of doing that. But a social safety net and a space where children do not go to bed hungry. There is no way in the world, no one in the Netherlands would sit and think that that is okay and that that's
Mhm.
not their business. That is absolutely their business. It is absolutely their business to make sure that the strongest shoulders can carry the burden. That you disaggregate and take things apart and you spread it around so that the community, so that this country itself will be okay. And that people, you know, don't have to work day in, day out just to exist. That is not the way. And in fact, they have a very beautiful approach to like life. And that's why you see the Dutch travel so much. And they really believe in family and spending a lot of time around creating a quality life. You know, my husband does not understand the what he says work, 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 work of like being here in the States. And I had to explain to him because, you know, what's going to catch you? You don't work, 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 work. What happens? He
Very
can't
good point.
and you know and they just simply do not work in the same way at all and everything from having you know sabbaticals that people can take when they've undergone tremendous trauma. You know, I had a niece who had issues with having her baby, and she and her husband, and it's completely traumatic when parents go through this. I know no one here who is able to actually been able to really grieve or deal, you know, really deal with their hospital systems and all of these other things without having to constantly worry about still their jobs and how they're going to explain all of this and hope that their employer will have some empathy and you know but it's always the hope. It's not that there is a system in place that you don't have to count on the benevolence of a boss or an organization, but in fact that you are living in a place when you are a wealthy country, for goodness sake. How dare you be able to say that you are one of the wealthiest countries in the world and you still cannot have people take a break when life has been so stressful and when they have things that no one wants to have to deal with, much less do it and still think about having to do everything else. You know, and the same thing goes to for your health care, and the same thing goes for your so many other things that for them there is a lot more acknowledgement of human resources, not just human resources HR, but humans as the resources that we are. And so I think those are the differences that I have seen and that we've experienced as we are figuring out, you know, the way that we're raising our son. Most importantly is that he cannot be selfish. That there is just no room. We have no room for that. There's no time for that. We agree on that. So again, despite sort of the different ways that we exercise being around family and people and village and all of that, and mine is probably like the y'all come version to his is like exactly how many people are coming to dinner and what is the exact time. Um, but
That
he will
is
have that
how
dinner
you were
right on
raised,
the dinner
though.
table.
I
Absolutely.
mean,
The
your
doors of the
house.
church are open, you know, and it's like wide open. And so, but, you know, but inside of both of these models, you know, we believe in, um, we believe in humanity. And there's a lot that goes into that if you really believe in that. If you believe in the inalienable rights of all people to live a certain quality of life, then we have to sort of actively practice that. And oftentimes that means that you do things for other people, period. You just do it. You feed into the system, you put something in there. It's not one to one. That's not how that works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you talk about work, and I think I side more with your husband's approach, but the truth is that you do work your butt off. If you could give us like a glimpse or a little story of the arc of what has been this 20-year career in politics. Um, and I know that you don't have to go into each and everything that you've done because you've done a million things, but if you'd like to just share with our audience about, I believe that you attended an HBCU and which one that was, and then how you wound up in this incredible position that you're in right now.
Yeah. So I am a proud Howard University Bison graduate, HU, you know. Uh,
Yes, I do know.
all who are out there. Um, and you know, it was everything that I'd hoped for and more. And I as a part of being in Washington D.C. and going to college, the strange thing is that I I sort of never considered working on the Hill.
Hmm.
Politics wasn't my initial goal. I was a journalism major, and it was though like by the time I got to my minor, which was political science, I saw a marked difference in my own interest level, as in a surge. It was incredible the difference. I mean, I liked journalism, but there were parts of it that were already starting to make me doubt whether that was going to be my eventual field. And I was so angry at the press around their treatment of Anita Hill because that happened during my time in school that it really I just thought I'll never be able to keep a job because they're going to give me jobs like that and I'm going to say no. I will not go and sit on this black woman's lawn and treat her the way that I felt that the reporters were treating her. And that's with someone whose politics I disagreed with,
Hmm.
but obviously stood with her in that moment for sure. Um, so but more than anything, I just felt I suddenly started to feel so much more passionate about what I was learning in my political science classes, and um, but it still didn't make me think about a career in politics because even during my growing up, Ayana, like I don't know that we knew about. I don't know. I don't feel like we discussed a lot of formal political the formal political industry.
No, I
we,
don't
we
think
we
we did.
came more from like the get in there and do something grassroots side of things. We had mothers who showed up. They were doers. No, no, but we weren't talking about the Democratic Club. We weren't um, necessarily being specifically and purposely involved in party politics or anything that was sort of that specific structure. We were two daughters of two very active educators who, were involved in the things that I would later learn touched a lot of these other institutional pieces, but I was sort of like a couple of rungs removed. And so it just didn't occur to me to go and work on the Hill at any point in time. I worked for a social justice public relations firm. I worked for the National Education Association, which I didn't realize even until that point when I went into this huge building how powerful teachers are. And they should be. I mean, look at the responsibility. My God, I know that I finally have an amen corner in this time of COVID for those of us who homeschooled. But, I really hadn't sort of seen Washington, D.C. and where a lot of these national organizations really do their work and where, a lot of that culminates here. And I didn't understand any of that until I started getting like my internships and doing work inside of this little pieces. And I was like, whoa, this is big. Like, wow, okay, this is a lot. And then I ended up getting my first job, it would turn out, at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, a thing I'd never heard of, but which, I had my summer before going to Howard volunteered for the Democratic National Committee's convention. But I really only ended up doing that through an organization that I belonged to. And then we ended up doing it. And that was amazing because I met this guy named Ron Brown who I was like, oh my God, who is this man, this incredibly important and powerful African American man? And, we didn't have Google, so I had to like really go and do my research. So, but that was a really impactful moment to see him to sort of be around all of um, these black people that were inside of the Clinton orb at that time, and to see people who would later, like Alexis Herman, who would become the labor secretary, and others. I mean, it was an incredibly powerful moment for me. But I still went off to college and sort of didn't think about formal democratic politics. I end up being recommended to go and interview for a job at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. I did not get the job I first interviewed for, but they gave me a different type of opportunity, which I took. And it was more like an hourly thing that kind of would leave me in the space. And one night I ended up going out of my way to help like stuff and fold and stamp and whatever like thousands of invitations that had come in late. And I called my best friend and had her come over. I said, I'm going to give you half my pay. We got to get this thing done and get it in front of someone's door so they can get this out tomorrow. So she did that. And apparently the next day it caused a huge buzz because no one understood. They had kind of given up on this. Everything had arrived late. They would sort of thrown their hands up and they couldn't believe that like everything was bought and sealed, ready to go. And so they ended up offering me a job in one of the departments, and I ended up staying for two election cycles under two really great bosses, which, by the way, great bosses matter. And I really felt that I learned so much because when you're at these umbrella organizations, you are looking out over the country and you are getting this incredible sort of living civic engagement lesson as we learn about these different congressional districts in each of the states, and then you're learning about the people inside of these. And so it just was a really strong first opportunity for me because it gave me a national foundation that I would not have otherwise had.
Mhm.
And that really gave me a lot to then move on. And my next job, honestly, Ayana, and you will maybe chuckle at this, but I couldn't figure out who I wanted to work for. I
Mhm.
felt like I'd had two really great bosses, and I thought lightning is not going to strike the third time. It's just not going
Mhm.
to happen. And during my time there, I had realized that I had this aha moment about why there were not more voices at the table of power that looked and represented more of the country. And I realized it because I was like, oh my God, like is this what it takes to get elected to like one lousy congressional seat? Like, holy moly,
Mhm.
no wonder there aren't more folk here. Like, this is a high wall. This is a lot of money to raise. This is like a lot that you have to do in order to be able to really be a contender here. So I get it. And I see like why so many of our folks, we have a political education gap. And I got to go tell it. I got to tell this. I got to share it with more people. And that's kind of what inspired my next move, which was to hang out my own shingle. I mean, I saw a lot of the white men that I worked with, they were all going and hanging out shingles. I mean, and they were going to go and like, be, I don't know, venture capitalists and whatnot. Like mine was a much less moneyed path, I have to say. But oh well, I
But
was 23, 24, and I had all my little values in front of me, and I had to go tell it, and that's what I was focused on. And I had done at that point, well, political fundraising had been my focus, and I really wanted to be able to bring that to more people. And so I opened it with another Black woman, and we had our firm for almost 5 years. I ended up kind of being in a place where I was ready to transition out of just doing money. And that's what kind of led me back to also being ready to kind of like um, kind of go back out into like an organization and to really be able to kind of like spread my wings in a different way. And I ended up at the AFL-CIO working for the House of Labor for almost 2 years, which was also really educational, just like the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee had been, because it was another umbrella national organization. And so, again, working with all of these political directors and others that represented people in the states was really, really helpful. And, somewhere in there, though, I was kind of like, okay, I've kind of dipped my toe now into the political side of things. I still want to spread my wings even more. And that's when it was the precipice of the presidential election. This was around 2007, and I had interviewed with several of the different campaigns, but I ended up going and working for Joe Biden's campaign. So I was one of the few, the scrappy, who really, went and it was because they were like, tell us what you want to do. Who do you want to be? And I was like, wow, I've never been asked that question before. I'm compelled. And his campaign at the time was being run by the only person of color running a presidential campaign. I think that cycle. I think that is the case because I can't remember who Bill Richardson's manager was, so maybe I'm wrong. But Luis Navarro was my boss at that time, and I was very proud to go and work for him. He came out of SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, and I thought I will come and work for you, Louise.
Mm.
And so we did, and then Iowa happened, and so that was done, and we didn't anymore. And from there, I decided not to go on any of the other presidentials, and instead went to North Carolina to work for a woman who no one had ever heard of. And at this point, they were convinced I was completely crazy. I'd gone and worked for what they thought of as the fifth place guy, and now I was going to work for some little known state senator in Greensboro, North Carolina.
But you were
Well,
making moves.
we ended up making her a U.S. senator, and we beat Elizabeth Dole, the wife of Bob Dole, and herself a very strong contender. But we were able to win and make that a Democratic seat in North Carolina, which is an incredible, incredible victory. Thanks to so many Black voters in the state of North Carolina who really made the difference. And it was an Obama year as well. And that's when North Carolina also turned blue for President Obama. And Joe Biden became the vice president. So then I wasn't so crazy. Or, I wasn't so as short sighted as maybe some people thought. That's why at times you really got to sit and listen for the things that matter most to you in the job. Don't think necessarily about the prestige. Definitely don't let money be your decider. One of my mentors told me that before, and I was listening for other things for me that I felt were more important at the time. And sometimes it's about that person, but sometimes it's about the person working for the person, or
Mm.
sometimes it's about the moment and your own professional skill development. So there are like lots of other ways for you to sort of judge, your own choices and making notes, figuring out what's best for you. Definitely don't let it be the pressures that may exist around you. You got to go quiet and kind of listen to the whispers
Mm.
in life.
I think that's really beautiful. And what I often try to live by, I had a mentor myself. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I started fiddling with the cord. I had a mentor who told me a long time ago to listen to how I wanted to feel in a situation, and not what I wanted out of a situation. And I've kind of guided myself through that, and I think it's been a really beautiful way. But I love what you said about listening to your whispers, um, because I think so many people now are trying to figure out right which direction they're heading in, um, and what makes most sense. And there's so much noise around us, and so many people that feel compelled to make decisions based on fear. And if we can take a step back and listen to the whispers and think of how we want life to feel, I think you wind up living a life you're proud of. Um,
I 100% agree with you. And a part of what we are suffering from now are it's like the tremendous monopolies that have taken over this country. And the fact that somewhere along the way, so much of our small businesses have just been so swallowed. It has like taken a part of our soul with it. And what I see right now and what like has me all hopped up and excited is the opportunities for folks to be doing what you're doing, Ayana. Like this is a moment to be a serial entrepreneur and to really like pull out like your best vision board piece and zero in on the one that you know has been calling you. Um, don't get so overwhelmed, that right now you can't see that there are like people are dying to be able to support things that they believe in. And the more that they can find you, the better. And I honestly feel like I'm seeing it in so many different loops, aren't you? Like
I am.
from my college alum loop. I mean, the minute any black entrepreneur, who was a Howard graduate was like, "Hey, I have this little business," everyone was like, "How do I
Sure.
support it?" And like, yeah, coin, 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 and it was like, and it's amazing. And I'm also seeing people who are recognizing that I know, and this is something that you're taking us into, and this is your life's work. But um, the sort of wellness side of people, and particularly right now when we feel so unwell, when we feel so anxious, in a way that is better than it was when this first began. But I don't, it depends on where you are. I can say that because I'm in Washington, D.C., where the numbers have flattened, and I have a mayor who has been battling this president's idiocy, and not even idiocy because that would make it sound like it's not on purpose, but who's been battling this president who, continues to try to overexert himself when it comes to the District of Columbia and to sort of go tit for tat with her. Um, but and also has really not helped and has been um, horrible as a partner for governors in this country who have just sort of, particularly for Democratic governors who are actually working in a different direction, and that is the direction of cautiousness and putting health and safety first, and not leaping towards being able to tell the story of reopening that isn't a real one, and that in fact now has so many of our states moving in the wrong direction, as we know. So, but I feel like right now, this wellness piece is, and this kind of reimagining life, as you said, even post COVID, post pandemic, um, there is a huge desire for people to do life differently now. And I think a lot of this, we've come to a head because it has been an unsustainable way that we are living without a healthcare safety net, living, doing work, 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 work. Barely living. It's like existing, and not even getting to spend more time with my son and my husband now than I have at any time in our marriage because I've just been off the road. And the reason I was on the road was because, of wanting to get to a place where, um, I mean, this work was just so hard. And when you are trying to get people um, elected and or otherwise sort of to the table of power, in an ecosystem that can be so hostile to that, it takes everything. And unfortunately, I still hadn't found that place where I was getting, to one where uh, there was kind of like where I was able to hit that part of the curve where you start to take it down a bit. But I am going to do that after this election. And that is a promise I've made to myself and to my husband. Um, and I think I don't think I'm alone in that. Like, I just don't see folks wanting to return to that really lacked in a lot of ways the ability to connect to your life. That's why we're constantly in search.
Absolutely. I think about where we are now in this era of being told to take a seat, right?
Mhm.
And I think about how many of us thought that we didn't have time for self care or time to focus on mental health or time to focus on wellness. And one of the things that I hope that people gather from this boiling point is that when we hide or suppress those traumas of daily life, because we all kind of deal with micro traumas throughout our life, some of us deal with larger ones. Um, that by ignoring that, how that presents itself in our life, right? How it presents in the body physically, how it presents in our relationships with our people, um, and in our quest to live a good life and what feels good. Um, and that we all start using this time to figure out what that self care means, right? Because it doesn't mean the same thing for every person. And I meditate. That doesn't mean that that's what works for you. Um, and finding this time to figure out kind of what are the tools in your tool belt to help you deal with whatever is going to come next, but also to deal with where we are right now. And kind of living more in this moment and taking these days. I'm calling it like slow living, right? It's just we're in an era of kind of slow living, and in that time, how are we how are we dealing with what's happening inside? Um, and so I wonder for yourself, and maybe there is no answer yet because there's been so many other things to deal with. Um, as a powerful woman in your career, as a mother, as a wife, are you able to find times for self care, for self check ins? And what do those look like? Or is it just like, I know I need to put my head down and kind of barrel through right now? And like you said, it's kind of waiting over the mountaintop after election.
Yeah, there is a big piece of that, and I'm trying not to um, make it like some faraway destination. Um, I definitely have found ways to that just like that really bring joy to me, and I think that like the being in community for me is a very helpful piece of life for me, especially because we've been so isolated. So, um, as a hugger, it's been really hard.
Yeah. It is. This is a hard time for like huggers, extroverts, like people that need to be near people. Oh,
Yeah,
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 I get
uh,
it.
yeah, yeah. So it means that I do enjoy like the various ways in which I've been able to interact with folks. I mean, my best friend and I, we did test it, and I do have my son like even in a small camp with folks. So we have been doing the socializing in a pod kind of
Yeah.
thing, and that has been like life saving to just even have. And I started out with this group of like two moms, and we were each other's like truly like our each other's sort of um, support system at the beginning of COVID and the self isolation. We did the morning walks together. We were figuring out, the times because then if other people started doing that, it's shifting together. But it was during the time of like early homeschooling and figuring this all out. Getting out and doing those early morning walks was absolutely critical. And it was as critical as like the chamomile, ginger, honey, pinch of cayenne, lemon tea that I needed to make for myself because that cayenne kicks your anxiety butt, and it gets
Does.
right to that little queasy feeling in your tummy when you are starting to have like a little bit of a panic thing going on. And I I had those for sure. Those middle of the night wake ups. I am definitely that 3 a.m. girl. And I think also because I started to just like feel this sense of like insecurity about physical security. So half of the time that was like where my like, very illogical thought process would go. I don't know why it was in COVID that every other day I was suddenly my house was getting broken into, but like I think it's more the New Yorker in
It's
me.
the New Yorker. It was just that stuff. Like, literally will check our door. We're in the middle of nowhere. I'll check the door. I'm
Yeah.
checking locks. And John is like, what? Relax. I'm like, it's the New Yorker
Yeah.
in me. I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not a thing. So I have since then like brought it down several matches, but at the beginning that was the first thing. And again, no clue as to why that was that, um, but yeah. So that's that. Those little pieces, and I have a good friend Reggie who is amazing and who is also a yogi, and he is in politics and has really brought the practice and wanted to for a long time bring that practice into our political space. And so I was so excited to invite him to come and to lead a practice for our staff at the DNC and to he's I know been doing this for some of the congressional members and their staff.
It's so
Um,
important.
it's so important, and yoga was really it's been one of my mainstays for a person who like me who is an on and off sort of uh, with my I guess it's not called a practice if you're not doing it consistently.
Well, it's a
But it's
thing you
always
like
been
to
there
do.
for me. It's my thing that I like to do. Spinning, yoga, walking. That's pretty much that's my zone.
My
Um,
mama would be so happy that you're doing yoga.
yeah, no, I love it. And so Brother Reggie, and I had him do a session, a private one. I just decided with my girls, like I could feel us all at that funky point where we just needed to be able to like probably scream, cry, and then like, and then flow.
Yeah. It's called
And
balance.
he didn't do any downward facing dogs. We did like other things that were really helping to work out. He wanted to start with like, where are the things that are cramping up? You know, you all
Mm.
are doing things right now that aren't natural. You're sitting for such long periods of your day. You're at your computers constantly doing X, Y, and Z. And, you know, so he really like took it and kind of really like edited it to meet like our true needs,
Hmm.
which is what is so amazing about yoga and that practice, is that there's so many ways you can go to meet the physical and the mental needs.
It can, I mean, it's so accessible and so applicable. And,
Mhm.
you know, outside of the physical aspect and the known mental benefit, it's just, it's a nice time to just check in with your body and to notice, yeah, where am I holding tension? What's not feeling good? Am I more anxious than I'm letting on? You know, those are important questions to ask yourself because that allows you to live better, and we're all just trying to live well at this point, right? And well holistically.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear that you are finding moments for peace, and always happy when people come on this platform and can share for others who are like, I don't know what to do. And that recipe alone, she is correct. Cayenne pepper to balance anxiety is fantastic. I myself have been leaning on mushroom tea. Four Sigmatic is this wonderful brand that you can order on Amazon, but they do like mushroom blends. And so you'll have a type of tea because mushrooms are known for balancing anxiety, and it'll have like 20 different mushrooms in one, and blend it with some almond milk and honey, and it's a delicious, delicious way to end the day. And that's how I kind of.
Oh, it actually tastes good. This isn't one of those
No,
things.
no, no. I promise this is actually good. So I don't use
Okay.
water. I use almond milk as
Got
my
it.
like blend, and then I add cinnamon and raw honey. But I have found, as someone who deals with my own anxiety, that when I have that at night, it allows me to sleep through the night, and I wake up much calmer. Um, I'm somebody that usually when I deal with anxiety, I have to like intentionally, I have to intentionally work on it. Ignoring it was not helping me in my 20s. And so now it's like, okay, it might take something different every day, but that tea is phenomenal. And they have one that replaces coffee, but I've never tried that. But I do just the blend is the name.
Got it. I just wrote it down.
Yeah, order it. Let me know. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Muthoni. If you can let people know if you do have a platform you'd like people to join you on. Otherwise, if you would just let us know again your incredible title and position within the party, and maybe just like a tidbit of hope for us for how we should be approaching this election and moving forward.
Fantastic. Well, again, my name is Muthoni Wambu Kraal. I'm the National Political and Organizing Director at the Democratic National Committee. And as we are thinking about our power right now, because I never like to make elections the sole focus of your thought process. There is a lot of power dynamics that are going on around us, and there is so much to feel excited about, hopeful about, and for you to be present around. I think that this time, I hope that this time more than any other, has pointed out the importance of our state and local electeds, and pointed out the power that you have, to start to change things right in your own communities, right in your neighborhoods. These police forces and the reforms and all of the changes that have been taking place so quickly in large cities. LA can begin to make incredibly big changes. Yeah, a city of that size it can and is, under a mayor that has shown incredible leadership in Mayor Garcetti. Um, that then, when you think about anything that is smaller than LA, got a lot of room to work with. That's a lot. That's most of our cities, right? And then you get down to towns and counties and all of that, or counties and towns. Um, this is happening. And there is an accessible place for all of us in it. And I have seen some of the most amazing acts really count in this moment. I have been a part of even my own staff who said, "All right, we're going to get water, umbrellas, fans and masks, and we're going to go and join these students who are out. They're going to do a protest from the White House to MLK Memorial." And we ended up having our chairman come out there to meet with them beforehand. And then he ended up marching with them. But, we didn't just show up to sort of have that conversation. We came with something to help support truly in a holistic way. There weren't a whole lot of other supplies that had been. So don't assume that somebody else is doing it. I have seen our own Democratic Party in Arkansas, for instance, the executive director and the chairman there, they decided that even while in Little Rock, they were experiencing real tumult, and their office experienced vandalism, that they still continued to make sure that they were supporting the protesters. They made their parking lot into like a medical check-in spot for folks, and they had water and things like that. And so, I decided, okay, team, what are we going to do to support Karen and her staff of like what 6 people in this time? We're going to just buy them some dinner for Saturday night after such a long week. There and see, and then if you were the entrepreneur that we wanted to support, let me take it full circle. If we wanted to make sure that in that moment we were still supporting small black businesses, then
Yes.
So, and I think that people are thinking like this. Like
Yes.
our chakras are all the way open now, and we are being so thoughtful about our thoughtfulness. We really
Yes.
want to make sure that we're seeing it through. And I think that's why it's so successful having all of these resources out there that guide you. Um, but you know, the biggest thing that we got to do in November is obviously get rid of this president. He is a threat to our way of life. It
Yes,
is
he is.
already, and if he is allowed to come back after blatantly breaking the laws, as he has done over and over and over again, then we will have reelected an oligarch. And there are 2 ways to do that. You vote for Joe Biden. If you stay home, or if you vote for a third party, then everything is a plus for the Trump category. So
Mhm.
you have to commit to the idea that whether or not Joe Biden was your first choice of candidate or your fifth or not really at all, we're down to 2 choices on the ballot for the president, when it comes to like winners and losers. And there is no way that a third party is going to win at this juncture. All they're going to do is siphon off votes at some point. And inside of that, you're never just electing the president, as we have all seen. We are electing someone to replace Attorney General Bill Barr, who has been, right by this president's side and enabling him in every way. And his gross misconduct. I mean, I think that we have all seen that. And when we're in a time of deep reform, that is not who we need as an attorney general. We are right now have so many Democrats up and down the ballot. These Republicans in the Senate have been just as much of a problem as Donald Trump. The number of conservative judges that they have enabled him to, and they're young. So they are stacking the judicial right now in ways that nobody gets to sort of turn off after November. That's why I want us in the same way that you're talking about, Iana, about how we're going to kind of reimagine life and live it differently. Settling in for the fact that we all need to stay present in our politics, that just has to become a normalized way of thinking. So, yes, parents who are raising your kids to be engaged and explaining to them what they're seeing on the news, or, I sat with my son and had him paint his own Black Lives Matter poster. And that was the time during which I could share with him a little bit of the talk. And he still had tears, of course, welling up in his eyes. But the act of painting the sign, and then the act of going out and us joining this little protest that was going around our park, act of doing something, that was the lesson about how different you feel than just sitting around discussing something with tears in your eyes versus the act of doing something. And we need to be raising our youngins right now to be doers, to be a part of their own. Don't be wait for somebody else to solve all of the problems. You have a job to do, and your job is to be involved. And it does not mean that that needs to be your 24/7 job. That's my job. But
Yeah.
but
But
I
we
need
can take
you.
a couple hours
I
off your
need
schedule.
you, and I
Yeah.
need to hear from you, and I need to know. You help inform my perspective, and you help me inform someone else that has a hand on a lever. And so that's kind of how the circle of life works, right? This is a very African way of being, and that is gathering together and making sure that each of us is doing the job here. So, there's a moment now where there's a lot of activism, and I hope that that is kind of who we're going to be, which is are people who are like the sister I met in line when I went and voted recently, which I am not going to do, by the way, physically in November. I hope that everybody is getting their absentee ballot. Like, it was nearly impossible to socially distance out there. The
Mm-hmm.
line was down the street, around the corner. I waited to vote for over 2 hours, masked, all of us. I think there would have been crowd justice if anybody had showed up without the mask, but
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless, we were not distanced. So there was still risk in that. Don't do it. Get your absentee ballot ready, and make sure that you are going to vote all the way down that ballot. You are going to be at home. You can look people up, or you could just go vote Democratic and then figure it out later. But
Straight down the line.
just straight down the line. But I really encourage people to take a minute and try to figure out who these people are. I mean, my girlfriend and I, there were positions we were like, oh, wait, yeah, who's in that? And I know that I work for. But most of my time is spent on airplanes. And so I was like, oh, yeah, wait a minute. Now, for this thing that isn't, these top three jobs, but like this kind of thing that I don't think a whole lot about. Now, who is that again? And we were exchanging with one another, but that's what we do. Um, and I encourage everybody right now to go ahead and get their absentee ballots. There's no need to wait for those. And you're going to take your power in November, but there are plenty of steps and ways to do it all along the way. There are people who need your support, small businesses that need our support. Um, so much that we can do that is political, that isn't directly related to elections, but is an expression of your politics and your values.
Thank you so much. And I hope by by the beautiful words that you shared that we continue to gather together. Um, and that we continue to gather together to move forward together. Are you
Thank
able
you,
to?
and thanks so much for having me on, Iana. I love you. You're
I
looking beautiful, feel beautiful, sound beautiful, and
I love you. I love you so much. Thank you for taking the time to talk to our audience and for just sharing everything that you did. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you.